been huge fans of everything that Chad and Sara are doing with this Bourbon Night since day one. I've been watching them for many years now. Never thought I'd be able to sit here and participate in a show with you. So it's a real honor. So first and foremost, on behalf of the Bourbon Lore family and then the It's Bourbon Night family, cheers, you guys.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you for inviting us.
Thanks for having us. He kept building up this YouTube channel. I was like, all right, when did they get here?
Wait, that's us. I think I might know them.
Yeah.
You guys have done some incredible things and really shaped a beautiful community in the whiskey world with what you're bringing to life with your content, your stories. And I'm just curious from your perspective, for some of us that maybe are watching here on the Bourbon Lore side that haven't had a chance yet to check you guys out, what is this story of It's Bourbon Night, and just a little bit of like the background with how did this whole thing come to life?
Sure, the origin story, right?
Origin story.
Yeah.
I need to pull out the Bardstown bourbon bottle for the origin story.
That's right. Well, I had honestly wanted to do a YouTube channel before, but I knew I wasn't the kind of person who was going to do by himself and just talk to the lens and not have anyone to bounce it off of. Yeah. So I knew I wasn't going that route. And I knew I wanted to be one of my friends, but my current friends, no one, I just don't have that right person yet. And then eventually I met Sara and we started having some bourbon nights, which is where the name of the channel comes from. You know, you invite a friend over, they bring a couple bottles, you bring out a couple of your bottles, you drink on them, and it's a bourbon night.
Right.
And so after I met her and I guess maybe convinced her to come over to drink some whiskey,
Not a bad bribe though.
Right, yeah. We started doing what I'd done with friends before. You know, what do you think about this one? Let's even write it down. Like, you know, it's sort of like practice.
Right.
We know people who can pull out all these tasty notes and nose notes, and that's great. You got to put in your 1,000 hours or 10,000 hours, I'd say. So we would start writing things down.
You're going the pilot level here.
Right, yeah, writing things down. And eventually I said, you know, Sara, I'm into video. I was into video production. I was like, why are we writing this? The handwriting keeps getting messier and messier as the night goes on. And why don't we film it? What would you think about putting it on YouTube?
And I said, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Had you been like sipping whiskey, before this and enjoying it, or was this something that was new to you at this point?
It was relatively new. I had been kind of dipping a toe into the whiskey world for a few years.
Okay.
At the time, I was working for a hospitality group in Kentucky that was opening a bourbon bar, and this was in 2014, so it's been 10 years now. And they were boasting, we're going to have over 200 bottles, which at the time I was like, oh my gosh, I've never heard of anything like this. But we're going to have 200 unique bottles of whiskey or bourbon. And I kept thinking, I'm a born and raised Kentuckian. I don't know that I could name 20, let alone 200. So I kind of took it upon myself to get more into it. And I started down that path on my own. That project, opening that restaurant, was kind of what brought us together, what made our paths cross.
Okay.
And so from there, we kind of started to explore down what we call our bourbon journey together. And we launched the channel officially, put out our first video in 2016. So it's been over 8 years now.
Wow.
And I never thought in a million years that, for us, it was like a reason to do the hobby, right?
Yeah.
You say you're creating something. Didn't think we would get 1,000 subscribers. We did. Okay, well, we won't get 5,000 subscribers. Oh, there they are. And then, in 2020, we surpassed 50,000, and just in the last year have passed over 100,000 subscribers. And
cheers to that.
Thank you.
Cheers to the fans.
Always cheers to the fans. I can't believe that many people kind of want to explore the bourbon journey with us.
Absolutely.
And Chad just brings such an interesting dynamic to the YouTube world. It's like, how would you not want to tune in and hear what you have going on?
And hear Chad's pop culture references.
You got to combine what you love. Since we're sort of like the elder statesman of Whiskey Tube now, since we've been doing it for 8 years.
Don't call us old.
Well, as far as Whiskey Tube goes, as far as Bourbon Tube goes, I should say, there's other YouTube channels who started doing whiskey, scotch, that type of thing before us, but really bourbon, we're about the first, if not the first. I've never officially
Yeah, I was gonna
hired
say,
an
who is,
investigator
like,
to,
who's kind of.
It's one of those things, like if you ask, like, where does bourbon come from? Who was the first one to do? There are some different takes, and it kind of
Obviously, Evan
depends
Williams, let's
on
not
which
go-
lens you look at it through.
right, and they're like, oh, that was 2016. That's way too long ago. We can't look into that.
But I think it's neat that we're essentially have been kind of working on similar projects, you know, between us with our channel and then you with your book.
Right.
We're just trying to bring people along on our journeys individually of what has been significant to us and, you know, our favorite things throughout time. And that's really what you've been able to capture with the book.
I appreciate that. You know, it's I mean, you think about how many conversations you guys have had, I'm sure, with fans or with some of you know, these masters, you know, master distillers, or within the own, you know, your own kind of like whiskey influencer kind of crew, and like there's all these great stories, and there's some incredible bottles that get shared and poured, but not always do they get captured, right? Not always do those stories get told, and so that's kind of part of this, you know, passion project here. I'm curious, when thinking about everything you guys have seen, I mean, obviously one of the top channels out there. You've had an amazing 8 years. When you see this, like, what's first impressions when you see the book? I'm just curious. And this is not edited, so like, you know, this is the raw truth of Chad.
Well,
You go ahead.
I would say I can recognize the amount of time that went into this. You know, I haven't written a book before, but I've made videos before, and done projects and made web series and things like that. So I can appreciate the amount of time. That's what I first see when I open this up is, you know, one, the amazing photography, but then, you know, you're looking more into it with these blurbs here and the information and the research. That's what sticks out to me. And then I'm like, this not only took time, but it was obviously a labor of love. That comes across, you know, very easily when you flip through this, and the quality, the pages, the heft of the book itself. You said it's like almost 5 pounds. Like,
It's a ribeye.
This was not a overnight type of project, obviously.
Yeah, and I come from a marketing background, so I have to kind of fight the urge to go down that same path of, like, that being my first instinct is to think how much time, money, and resources went into capturing this. But honestly, when I first see it and when we were first flipping through it, my initial thought was, it reminds me of those special, unique bottles that we've come across in our 8 years doing the channel of, like, maybe we didn't even get to record the actual experience, but just being at someone's house and then pulling out something special and sharing it with you, or your favorite vintage bottle you've ever tried. It brought those memories up for me. So even though we're not, you know, those same bottles aren't in this book, that was what my mind went there.
Love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I mean, you know, obviously I wasn't exactly sure how to, like, you know, when you start thinking about kind of bringing a book together, what does that look like? So Clay's written some incredible books. Clay Risen, our co-founder in Bourbon Lore, and my teammate. And a lot of the books that are out there are kind of diving into distilleries of today, right? You know, what distilleries should you check out? What releases do they have? And that's awesome. And I think those are beautiful pieces. So, like, what can we do that's a little bit different? And how do you create something that, to me, not only highlights, you know, some incredible bottles, but I really wanted to tell the story of American whiskey through, you know, this kind of century of incredible lore and some amazing chapters, but featuring the bottles themselves, where they too get to almost be like the characters in the story.
Mm-hmm. For sure. You know, I can remember some bottles that are significant to me for different reasons. A lot of times it's the taste, obviously. That's what a lot of people would go to. But other times it's sort of when you are maybe turning the corner in your bourbon journey. Like, one that stands out for me is a William Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond 11-year that I bought probably back in maybe 2014, 2013, around that area. And it was because I had just done a tour at Heaven Hill, and I did the connoisseur tour, where instead of going around the distillery, you stay there in the gift shop, or whatever you call it.
Just had a little.
Yeah, you go into this little room, and there's like 4 or 5 pours, and it starts, you know, where you normally think, probably larceny or maybe mellow corn. I don't remember. But then you go up to William Heaven Hill, I think was the last one.
Not these days.
Not these days. Well, who knows? Who knows? Well, I do remember it was $20 back then. It's probably not $20.
Probably not $20.
And I had that William Heaven Hill.
The bottle or the pour?
The experience.
Yeah,
the connoisseur tour. $20. And I was like, oh, it's $20, but I think I'm going to do that.
I'll splurge.
Can you imagine nowadays?
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I had that, and I was like, wow, this is really something special. This is something that I haven't really experienced before. Yeah. And then they had it in the gift shop. It was $130. I'd never spent over $100 on a bottle of bourbon. Yeah. And I remember I went with my friend and I said, well, I'm that kind of guy now. I'm the $130 guy, bottle guy now, and bought that bottle. And that was me turning the corner into, well, I guess I'm more of a serious bourbon drinker. Serious bourbon drinker now, because this is worth $130 for me, just because I was so impressed by it. So
I love that.
And I'd be curious, is there a bottle that sort of reflects that type of story for you in this book?
Ooh.
Or like that aha moment.
Or the unicorn that you've been chasing and you finally got it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, each of these bottles in the book, are a part of my story, my journey, and we own all of them. We've opened up many of them. The days of we used to host in our family home, and even like my son would be like, "Dad, are we pouring a Willet Squat wax top, or are we doing a purple top?"
But definitely one of the two.
Yeah. Are we doing Lawrenceburg or Frankfurt tonight on the Pappy? Well, let's talk about that. I would say like there's definitely the bottle that I first had that I would say absolutely surprised me, and really I would say I had no idea that American whiskey could taste like this. I remember being at Urban Farmer, which is a restaurant in Portland that's still there downtown, and the gentleman knew I liked my Manhattans and I'd liked some old fashions, and this is 2012, right? So it's like I'd started kind of sipping and drinking neat, but he said, "Mason, I got a bottle for you, and I want to pour this for you." And he goes, "The team and I had it, and it's incredible, right?" And so he brought it over, and it was this Rittenhouse 21-year rye, right? So
and he made an old fashioned out of it.
Yeah, no, he did. We're gonna cut that. No, he did not. He did not. That's sacrilege, Chad. Sacrilege. God, Max. Shapiro's gonna hear this and be highly disappointed in me. Yeah, we did not do that, Max. But he poured this 21-year neat, and he brought it over. And I remember it was my first moment of just, nosing something where I didn't necessarily consider myself, a whiskey, connoisseur or anything of that nature. I was just a fan, right? And still to this day, I consider myself a big fan. But I nose it, and I was like, whoa, right? And he's like, take a minute, just kind of experience it. And then when it hit my palate, it was the first time I had this kind of front to mid to finish. I was like, whoa, and that moment, I had no idea that American whiskey could bring something to the table in such an extraordinary way, where I was literally left speechless and almost savoring and chewing on this, on this pour for what felt like minutes, right? And so I went out and in search of this bottle, and I remember, at the time it was a couple $100, and I thought it was, just
That's
like
crazy.
you, right?
That's
What,
crazy.
Who is charging that for this bottle? I wish I would have bought a case.
No kidding.
So this Rittenhouse 21-year is very special to me. And then I would also say, and I shared this with you guys earlier, I'd had a friend introduce me to Michter's around that same time. And we don't have the 20-year in here right now with the 25 rye and bourbon, but right, you have those moments. And I think, part of this for me, and I think part of what you guys are sharing in your show and in your content is to bring that gift of curiosity and that kind of gift of adventure. And I think a lot of this for me is when you can live your life in a way to where there's a level of curiosity and wanting to explore and see what is out there, and not just kind of assume that, bourbon is just these 3 brands, or it's just something you sip on it in Manhattan.
Sure.
I think there's a whole world waiting out there of adventure if you're willing to kind of, think a little bit differently around the opportunities as far as, going to a bar or going to a restaurant, or, even going into, I never even really, paid much attention when I used to go into liquor stores back in 2010, 2012, and I just buy whatever, right? So now it's very complicated, and it's, shows like yours that I have to watch personally to learn about what's going on. So,
Oof, yeah.
I think
go ahead.
between our experience, we're very fortunate after having done this for 8 years to have access to pours and bottles that, for example, at the event that we're going to be at with you tomorrow, that not everyone has a chance to try. And this book is full of things that most of us won't have the chance to try. And I think a lot, there are some people that might think of that as almost like I got it and you did it. But I think it's not about that. I think it's more of saying, again, here's my journey. Here's these things that were special to me and formed my experience overall. And it's an invitation to go out and find not those specific things for yourself, but an invitation to explore.
Yes.
We were at a...
or your own path.
Your own path, right? We were at a vintage whiskey shop in Covington, Kentucky called Revival Vintage Spirits. And they did what they call a $5 holler. And it was a $5 every day, $5 pour of vintage whiskey. And it's most people...
That's awesome.
You can't... at that
that.
point, for $5,
It was
if you know about it, it's an invitation.
go.
Things like this are an invitation to just go out, put yourself out there, and keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. It's not just modern day stuff, and it is barrel picks, but it's not just barrel picks, and it's not just these big distilleries, and it's not just vintage.
Right.
It's this whole ecosystem.
Yeah, I think, and because of what it was, and I remember that particular one, Sarah, was a Jim Beam decanter from late 70s.
Yeah.
80 proof, I believe. And I feel like some people would be like, oh, it's 80 proof Jim Beam. Jim Beam is normally towards more the bottom of the shelf. That's the cheap stuff. I'm
But
not
that's
going to get
today.
that. But that's today, exactly.
Yeah,
and I think that's,
right.
it's $5. What do you have to lose?
Yeah.
And it was actually really good. And
Yeah.
80 proof hit different back then.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. So I think that's another thing that we always try to kind of drive home is, try it. There's a saying, we have no bottom shelf shaming. If you like something that's on the bottom shelf.
Honestly, that's
Right,
good news
right.
for
You're
saving-
you. It's going to be
saving
cheap
money.
and available,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And especially with vintage. Now, just because it's vintage doesn't mean it's automatically good, right?
Yeah,
But there's some hidden gems out there for,
Yeah.
in this case, $5.
Yeah, no, I think it's well said. And if you come over to my house, I think everybody's always kind of they're always curious, what are you sipping on, right? And often then I have some staples that are my go-tos, and Jack Daniels is a big part of that, and it's I grew up around Jack Daniels. My dad sipped on Jack Daniels, and so always see a JD single barrel, sitting there on my shelf, or some Four Roads of Small Batch Select, or a little Wild Turkey Rare Breed. It's maybe even a Handle 101.
Hey, it has its place, right? On every bar card, I think.
Sure does.
But I think and to your point, this to me and what we're all wanting to do and contribute is to share, right? We're putting ourselves out there in a way to where we have passion and we have love and we have this appreciation to where I don't want these just to be with 1 or 2 individuals and never get expressed or told or shared with the world. And so I think for me with the book, it's look, this is priced at $80, right? And yet the amount of energy and effort and literally a couple years to be able to kind of get to this place. But to me, it's if we can have this be something that is a gift that somebody picks up for a family member, a loved one, a friend, a boss, a colleague, and it creates that level of connection, and they have a moment to kind of dive into some of these fun bottles and kind of get that lore going with with American whiskey to where they get done from that moment and go, man, this sparked something with me. I want to go learn more about bourbon. Right? I want to go pick something up, and then when somebody else comes over to my house, I hope that they pull this out and I got to show you this, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're a big bourbon guy or gal, but there's some cool bottles in here. Let me walk you through it. So.
Yeah, and let me share that story that you took the time to go out and find and
Yeah,
curate.
exactly.
Let me share that story with you. And then that's, used to be how stories were shared, was just orally.
Right.
So it's great to have it down in written form. I think it's a beautiful thing.
And I feel like that's really a reflection of like the backbone of the whiskey community, is that, you know, the coming together to share pours, share experiences, share stories about how you came across the bottle, share your bottles. And while like we can't physically drink the bottles that are in this book, you can talk through, you know, each of them and the stories and the lore, and then maybe try more modern day bottles or things that you have access to that tie back to some of these bottles I mentioned in the book. And again, it's just, again, that's a calling back to the reason that we all come together to sip bourbon anyway, right? To share like what we're doing right now.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
On your end, when you think about kind of the whiskey world of today, what are you excited about with what's coming? You know, when you think about like 2025, you've seen so much. You've covered so many distillers, so many products. Like I'm curious, like for those of us that are watching, we feel like you guys have access and have seen everything. What still gets you excited about American whiskey?
I think these, you know, it might sound funny, and some people will probably go after me in the comments for saying this, because some people have this notion of non-producing distillers, if it's sourced, it's not real. It's not real whiskey. It's not real bourbon, which of course we don't agree with that at all.
Some of these legends in the book were
exactly yeah. Say that to their face.
Yeah.
But it's these places that are taking distillate from different distilleries, maybe even through different states, and they're combining it in a fashion that is, you know, completely different than what they could be separate. And their goal is to find something that's better than all of them separately. And I think the art of blending, I think people are finally kind of coming around to, okay. Because, you know, you say single barrels.
Right.
And there was actually
There's a cult following.
At Kentucky Bourbon Festival, the Film and Whiskey, which is a nice podcast out there, friend of ours, and they were asking people single barrel or small batch, and the majority of people said single barrel. I think you and I, Sarah, both said small batch. I said small batch too, because not just consistency, but also, you know, you're trying to find the batch that you make is better than any of those single barrels. Now that might not always happen, obviously, because there's some incredible single barrels, but you also might get let down by a single barrel. It's no guarantee that a single barrel is going to be the best of the best. So I feel like these people who are taking distillate from all the different distilleries and they're combining something and they keep working on it and honing their craft to where it's an art. And then so that's what gets me excited is these incredible amount of possibilities of, well, we could take this mash bill from this distillery, this mash bill from this, put it in this percentage or this percentage. Like, how many different variables are there? It's endless. And finding that just right spot. That's what gets me excited.
Well said, brother.
Yeah.
I love it.
I mean, I would say same, but a little, same almost, to go a little bit off of that, right? Just a little
got a
bit
real Sara twist on it.
I think even going a little bit even further than that, and some, you know, I think purists won't like this answer, but seeing the boundaries of bourbon and whiskey expand and stretch a little bit, and more so in that I want to know, you know, people say that sometimes that they follow us because they like Chad's perspective on something or my perspective, or they like to hear our different flavor, you know, they identify with our palates differently. They like one person's notes over the other, whatever that may be. I feel the same way when I look at, you know, like you were saying, blenders or collaborators. I want to see other people's visions be executed through different lenses than what we've seen before, and kind of push those boundaries. Because if you really think about it, I mean, we've got a core group of major established distilleries that are making really quality stuff. It's going to be tough to beat them at their own game. So I'm more interested, I think, in the future of seeing different people come in together, kind of like what you're doing with Bardstown Bourbon Company with your collab, and saying, hey, this is my vision through them, and we work together to bring that to fruition. I think that's going to be, you know, outside of just barrel picks, which has kind of been where we've been coming from. That's, I think, you know, kind of the new frontier for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like that a lot, and I mean, it's amazing to see. I mean, obviously, as a category, where it's grown and how it's grown just in the last decade. And you know, I mean, obviously, there's, you know, certain individuals out there, and there's obviously numbers with what does 2024 sales look like versus 23 and 22. And I mean, obviously, it's across the board. It's not just in American whiskey, but yeah, 2024 has been a different year for a lot of brands, a lot of categories, and a lot of sales data. But the reality is, I truly believe bourbon isn't going anywhere, and American whiskey is just getting started. We've never seen the amount of investment, capital, PE activity than what we've seen in the last 10 years. And the investment, I believe, is going to start to shed light on a new iteration of what American whiskey represents. And you look at some of the talent that is here today as well, and it's incredible. Like, I mean, I know, like, we talk about some of the legends, you know, of yesterday, and some of the incredible, you know, pioneers in American whiskey, you know, between the Shapiras and the Samuels and the Russells, and, you know, obviously, you know, the Van Winkles and Drew and Evan and the Goldsteins. Like, there's, you know, some amazing pioneers in the bourbon world, but there's also this new generation that is pretty exciting to see, you know, come to life. So I love the fact that we have an opportunity as fans to be able to continue to kind of give our own approach and style to what inspires us about bourbon, right? What connects us with the spirit. And I think more than anything else, we all share in this love of community. We share in this love of, I would say, you know, friendship, and of, you know, a spirit that means something more to us than just a sip. It's a way of life. And so on behalf of the Bourbon Lore family, to you guys, thank you for being here this weekend. Thanks for helping write a chapter of lore and our American whiskey journey. And it's a real honor to be sitting here with you tonight. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Cheers.
you.